So, if you look at the history, right, of Korea, forget about North Korea, forget about South Korea. Let's just talk about Korea, right? Like Hals was saying earlier, Korea was its own kingdom, or its own nation for centuries, till eventually was colonized by the Japanese, right? That struggle went on for decades. When that struggle was finished, right, when Japan was defeated in World War II and can no longer hold its colonies, in this case, Korea, there was no, in 1943, 45, whenever World War II ended, there was no North and South Korea. You understand that? It was just Korea. So the communists who were fighting in the Japanese were all Korean. There was no North, no South. They were just one nation. When this occurred, when the Japanese were removed and began to cooperate with the United States in taking over its former colonies, because the thing about war, right, is that it's not like a video game where like the United States wins and now all the territories they were fighting for turn into US territories. It's not like that. The apparatus of colonization, the Japanese apparatus of colonization, was still there. So those remaining holdouts were now welcoming the US presence. So all of a sudden, you now have a situation where a majority communist country of Korea is now split in half by the United States, saying, okay, so this is going to be our red line because we can't let you guys have your nation. We're putting the line in the sand, right? So all of a sudden you have people in what we call the southern portion of Korea are all of a sudden in a new country. They just fought for their independence, and now all of a sudden they're in a place called South Korea. That's crazy, right? Now you are literally physically separated from your friends, from your family, from your comrade. So when the military fascist dictatorship, I think it was Sigmund Ring, but I could be wrong, was established in South Korea, that regime was so unpopular because it was capitalist and anti-communist that when eventually the now so-called North Koreans decided to retake their country and their liberation movement, which in the way I described it to you, I'd imagine you would see the logic and why that is the correct thing to do. When they invaded, the North Koreans were able to get to Seoul, I think in the matter of 3 days. They didn't do that through sheer military force and sophisticated weaponry and advanced military tactics. They did that because there was nobody in South Korea who wanted to fight the North. Because for the South Koreans, these were their homies showing up to be like, okay, we're rescuing you guys because you guys are being held hostage by this American regime. So that it was such a lightning fast takeover. That's why the United States had to commit a genocide to stop the so-called spread of communism. But it wasn't even to stop communism, it was to stop the unification of an entire country. That's why they killed 20% of these people. Because they had no, in the Americans' perspective, they essentially had no choice, because if they had allowed them to take the whole peninsula, they would have never been able to reestablish their control like they have here today. So when it comes to Korea now, Korea went through crisis when the Soviet Union was illegally dissolved. That's a whole other conversation. Now, North Korea is essentially in a position where they're a hermit nation, where resources are scarce. North Korea is a poor country, correct. But North Korea is still an operating country. It is still the only independent Korea, because what we call now the South Korea is a base of operations for Western capital and the United States and Japan. South Korea doesn't exist based off of any actual independence movement. It was simply an artificial, it was made by design to counter this liberation movement. Today is purely at the behest of the West and capitalist countries. Even when North Korea offers to send migrant workers or trade on the capitalist market, they're denied. Why? Because they did the most insulting thing they could have ever done to the West United States, and that was stand up for themselves.